Well, welcome everyone, and good afternoon. This is the follow-up question and answer session for CLP, for the Classification, Labelling and Packaging Regulation. My name is Lawrence Hodgson, and I work in HSE, and I'll be chairing this session. And joining me on the panel, the speaker from the presentation, Andrea Catons, and also joining from HSE is Francis McGuigan. So the intention of this session is to go through the questions that you've been submitting that we didn't get through in time in the presentation, and the opportunity to ask more and have a bit more of a detailed discussion here. You can submit more questions through the Q&A function in this Skype chat. And I encourage you to keep submitting questions if you have them. If we're not able to get through them in this session in the time we have, we will be taking them away. And any gaps in our information, we'll be updating our guidance on the websites or through e-bulletins. We're not going to be able to directly respond to individual questioners. So if you have a really urgent question that we're not able to answer today, please get in contact with the help desk and the helplines, and the details have been shared throughout the presentation and just on your screen before I appeared on it. Having said that, and hoping the panel are sitting comfortably, I'll kick off. So first question up, I've got a question on ATPs and MCLs as well. Updates from the latest ATP, and this includes titanium dioxide, appear to have been adopted into the MCL with immediate effect. Unlike the EU, where the new classifications are not compulsory until October, is this correct? If so, why has this been done without warning? And if not, please, could you review and update the MCL list? And I think we've had a similar question recently in HSE, so I don't know if either Andrea or Francis will be able to answer that one.
Hi, Francis, shall I take that one for now?
Yes, please.
Yeah. As I said in the presentation that I just gave, the latest dates of compliance for the entries from the 14th and 15th ATP will be the same as those as in the ATPs themselves from 2021, later in 2021, sorry, in 2022 respectively. As these are retained pieces of EU law, I understand that there may have been some confusion with the way in which the information has been presented in the mandatory classification and labelling list. And we hope to be able to provide some clarity on that, just to make sure that there's no further confusion. But the latest dates of compliance are the same as those in the text of the ATPs as published and amended.
Thank you very much for clearing that up, Andrew. And as you said, I think we're due to update the dispel any confusion there by updating the messages we provide on the website. I guess similar theme here about the sort of the transitional arrangements of moving into the new system. Is there any transition period for the labelling of a GB address and telephone number on the packaging of a hazardous substance or mixture? I don't know if anyone will be able to speak to that. So is there a transitional period for updating labels for a GB address?
There isn't a transitional period as such. We didn't build in any transitional arrangements into the CLP regulation. However, if a substance or mixture has already been placed on the market before the end of the transition period, there is a period of time to allow for changes to be made, and the substance or mixture can be supplied through the supply chain as it currently is labelled. So there is that arrangement for those goods already placed on the market, if that helps to clarify that particular aspect.
Yeah, no, thank you, Andrea. I've got a question on exporting goods to the EU. So taking the example of a GB-based supplier here, what do we need to do to export our goods into the EU with regards to labels and EU supplier contact details? And who actually has the obligations to comply here? Is it us in GB, or is it the EU-based importer?
I'm happy to take this question,
yep.
Andrea. Just to say that the person who actually has the obligations to comply in the EU will be the EU-based customer and importer. and the ECHA guidance that's been published has been very clear about those particular requirements. So in terms of what a GB-based supplier might need to do in terms of exporting goods into the EU with regards to the labels, what they will need to do is to speak to their EU supplier and find out from them what information they need and they will require for them to meet their obligations in terms of the EU CLP regulation and other chemicals regulations. Is there anything you want to add, Andrea?
No, I think you've said everything there, Francis. Thank you.
Okay, then similar question then about selling into the EU market. If one sells a hazardous product to GB and EU markets, can the addresses on both the GB and can the addresses of both GB and EU addresses be mentioned on both the product label and the SDS? So can the same addresses be used for both GB purposes and EU purposes?
Yeah, as I said in the presentation, or in the Q&A after the presentation, for supplying Great Britain, there has to be a GB-based supplier on the label, and for supplying the EU, there has to be an EU-based supplier on the label. It is possible to include on the GB label the address of an additional supplier in the supplemental information labelling section of the label. And as I said, the information should be for somebody who can provide information on the substance or the mixture if it's required, and there should be that agreement within the supply chain that it's okay to do that.
Thank you, Andrea. Just to remind everyone, with the session, we've got about another 20 minutes and we're running up to sort of 12:50. So please, do make use of this time to submit questions if you have them, and we'll see what we can get through here. I'm just turning just to take one out of the ones that are coming through the Skype Q&A. And apologies, I wasn't in the previous presentation, but I think it follows on from some comments you made, Andrea, which is when a new hazards are not listed in the, sorry, let me start this again. Apparently you mentioned a comment about adding in hazards not listed under the MCL for MCL liable substances. So can we use a more severe classification than the MCL if there is new data available, for example, under REACH registration, suggesting this, as providing new information on hazards as they come to light is a requirement under the Health and Safety at Work Act?
For the mandatory classification labelling, as I said, the entry which is in the mandatory classification labelling list has to be applied as it's written therein. If there's information to show that an additional hazard class or category or differentiation is appropriate, that additional hazard can be added to the classification. If there is information to suggest that the existing mandatory classification and labelling is incorrect, whether that should be more severe or less severe, then that has to be dealt with by submitting the information to us, and we would then have to make an amendment to the entry in the mandatory classification and labelling list. And anybody who's familiar with the way things operated in the harmonised system within the EU, that was how things used to operate, and it's a similar process, same process now. Would you add anything to that, Francis?
No, I don't think so. I think you've covered the answer there.
So I'm moving back and forth between the different questions we've had submitted. This question, I think, is around the scrutinising RAC opinions in the GB system. So has there been an official body within HSE or DEFRA, but I think HSE is the relevant organisation here, already established to scrutinise EU RAC opinions? Would it be possible to receive any information on the terms of reference for this group? So I guess in the GB system, how will we go about scrutinising RAC opinions, and is there any information to share on that process?
Yes, we don't have any intentions to set up a separate body per se, or to recreate something such as an equivalent of the Risk Assessment Committee within Great Britain. So the way in which the process will work is that a technical report, a technical assessment of the RAC opinion will be generated by HSE's scientists. That will go through our own internal scrutiny and assessment. That technical report will then be made publicly available for people to view. There will then be a separate policy process to generate and consider the technical report and any further information before a final agency opinion is generated on the overall RAC opinion. Again, Francis, would you add anything to that with regards to the policy aspects?
Yes, thanks very much indeed. Yes, the important thing to underline is that it's a full public consultation. There will be, as I say, using the HSE citizen space. There will be opportunity for people to provide their comments initially on the GB mandatory classification and labelling proposal. And of course, that will reflect, as it were, questions around the scientific side. What the policy, the impact and policy assessment that we will be providing on each substance will look at a variety of issues, including what the, as it were, the consequences are, as well as the supply and use profile of the substances provided, and whether any mitigation may be needed. And that will be considered as part of that sort of impact and policy assessment that will be carried out as part of the opinion. And that will be the basis, as it were, the combination of the technical report plus this impact and policy assessment will be the basis on which the minister and the devolved administrations will make their decision in respect of a Great Britain mandatory classification and labelling proposal.
Thank you, Francis. I've got a couple more questions that might have been prompted by the earlier discussion about exporting to the EU and the labelling requirements and addresses and such. So I may have already answered them, but I'll put them back out there. So if we're an existing GB manufacturer but exporting to the EU, we put 2 addresses on existing labels. Do we need to notify HSE about these changes? So do we need to tell HSE that we're using 2 addresses?
No, there's no requirement to notify us that they're of the information that they're putting on the label. The only requirements to notify us come under the notification requirements as part of Article 3940 of CLP. So there's no separate requirement to notify us about the addresses on their labels.
Yes, I completely agree, Andrea. Just an important point again is that the GB manufacturer that's exporting a product to the EU has no responsibilities in respect of the EU CLP regulation or the notification requirements under Article 40. But again, what you may need to do is speak to the person that you're exporting to, the person who's going to be responsible for meeting those requirements, and to make sure that they take those into account when they're putting them together. And you may need to provide a wider amount of information because, of course, they will have responsibilities in terms of notification, and to do so, they will need to have evidence or information from you in terms of the substance that that you're exporting or placing on the market.
So similar question, and I hope this makes sense, is that will the GB importer mentioned on the labelling be the only representative? I think, is that worded in a way that makes sense?
It does make sense, yes.
Yeah, thanks. Just me.
Do you want to answer that, Andrea, or do you want me to?
You can go on that one if you want to.
Okay, thank you, Andrea. I think the important thing to remember here is first of all is that there are no only representatives in respect of the CLP regulation. The only representative only appears in respect of the requirements of REACH. Effectively, it means that the duty holders, that's the manufacturers, importers, downstream users, will have responsibilities under the CLP regulation. So, I mean, effectively, again, the responsibility for meeting the requirements in respect of a a requirement in terms of labelling. It will be the GB importer is the person who has the responsibility under the CLP regulation, and that's why their name and their telephone number will appear in the notification under Article 40 of the regulation. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I need to add. Andrew, is there anything you want to add?
No, I don't think so. As you say, only representative is a term that is used in REACH, and the only representative is not actually a defined term under CLP, so they don't actually have any official roles under CLP, as Francis said. So it's the duties rest with the manufacturers, importers, downstream users, etc.
And I've got a question on this. I think this is a question on CLP, but it might be on sort of REACH terms here, because it mentions registering and they might mean notifying. But the question is, our customers in the EU are saying it's our responsibility to register our mixtures with ECHA. How do we achieve this with us not being an EU entity? Is that more of a REACH question, or is that CLP? It might be notifying.
It's possibly could mean a number of things. I wonder, because it refers to mixtures, whether it's actually referring to the requirement to submit information to poison centres, which is what it strikes me as referring to. In terms of those obligations, as I said earlier in the presentation, in Great Britain, I know that wasn't the question, but in Great Britain we haven't retained Annex 8, and so the requirements are different. We no longer have access to the ECHA notification portal and all that kind of stuff. In regards to goods that are going into the EU, it is again the EU importer who is responsible for any activity required as part of the EU regulation. Now, in order to achieve that, they may well need assistance from the GB-based exporters. So it might be that they need to supply their EU counterparts with information. But in terms of where the actual duty rests, it rests, as I understand it, with the EU-based importer.
Yes, completely. I certainly agree. One additional point, of course, is that it is not possible for a UK-based company to actually access the ECHA Poison Centre notification portal. So it wouldn't be possible for them to do it in the first place. But the duty and responsibility, which of course came in on the 1st of January 2021, is, as I say, rests with the EU-based importer.
Thank you, Francis and Andrew there. And I've got a follow-up question on poison centres, but in the GB context. So could you please clarify if it is mandatory to apply for an Article 45 mixture notification in GB, or if it is on a voluntary basis?
I'm happy to answer that question. The answer is in Great Britain, it's a voluntary requirement in terms of notifying details of mixtures, but again, the responsibility for making that, as I say, making that voluntary notification of using the safety data sheet to the National Poisons Information Service would be the responsibility of the GB-based importer. If you like, it's not, as I say, the responsibility of is again within Great Britain. We would certainly encourage everyone to send the information to the National Poisons Information Service, because this information can be used for the purposes of emergency response and also for providing information in terms of developing policy in relation to mixtures. But again, I think the important thing to say, it's not a mandatory requirement in Great Britain, but in Northern Ireland, where the EU CLP regulation applies, it is a mandatory requirement as a result of Annex 8, which came in on the 1st, as a way, which entered into force as we were before that, but applies from the 1st of January 2021. Is there anything you want to add, Andrea?
No, I don't think so. As you said, sorry, I think we would encourage people to submit information within Great Britain to the National Poisons Information Service. The requirement itself is relatively straightforward. It can just be the submission of a safety data sheet, so it's not the compilation of lots of different information. So I think it's something we would encourage, but as Francis said, it's not mandatory.
Thanks. I've got a question on precautionary codes. So will we need to use precautionary codes in GB CLP as they are used in EU CLP?
Yes, the precautionary statements will continue to apply, and the basic guidance requirements for the application of all of the labelling elements will remain the same as it did in the EU system. So precautionary statements will continue to be used. Precautionary statements aren't part of like the mandatory classification labelling requirements, and it is pretty much the responsibility of the supplier to determine the appropriate precautionary statements to apply to their labels.
Brilliant, thanks. Just to remind everyone, we're running into the sort of last 5 minutes here, but please keep submitting your questions, because what's not answered here we will be taking away. So trying to see if I can keep them coming thick and fast and make use of these last 5 minutes. Can we group GB CLP notifications for products with the same hazard classification and labelling? Is that possible?
Technically, no. Notifications have to be submitted for individual substances. So if the individual substance is within the scope of the notification requirements, then the individual substance has to be notified. So notification applies to substances which are classified as hazardous and which are placed on the market by themselves or as part of a mixture where they contribute to the classification of the mixture, or where they're subject to registration under REACH. But as I said earlier, where something is registered under REACH, there is no requirement to submit a separate notification. So notification has to be approached on a substance by substance basis.
Got a question on the safety data sheets. Has the content changed for safety data sheets with the transition to GB CLP and UK REACH? Or are they the same?
Because safety data sheets are part of the REACH regulations, so right. I think we're a bit limited in what we can say. So I think that would have to be directed to the REACH help desk specifically for specific information on the exact changes to safety data sheets.
So maybe going back a step then to the notification process. Do data notifiers, for example, to notify a change of classification to the HSE, have to be based in GB?
Well, the actual duty to notify only applies to GB-based manufacturers and importers and Northern Ireland-based suppliers who are directly placing qualifying Northern Ireland goods onto the GB market. So they are the actual duty holders who are responsible for submitting the information. I suppose technically someone could submit the notification for them, but they do still remain legally responsible for the information submitted and have the duty to notify. Would you agree, Francis, on that one?
Yes, I certainly agree with what you said. I think the most important thing to kind of point out is that the reason why we have this duty is that the GB-based employer that notifies the information on the substance to the CLP notification database. The purpose of this is to ensure that we continue to protect human health and the environment, and particularly if you're updating, you know, especially it's more likely to be because it's likely to be a more severe hazard classification. It's important that that information is distributed and made available, not just in terms of, as it were, to the regulator, but also in terms of what appears on the actual labels themselves. So again, it would be very, very difficult, I think, for somebody that was outside of Great Britain to be able to respond, as it were, with sufficient speed in terms of being able to reply to, you know, making sure that they have that responsibility to keep the information about the hazard up to date.
Now, in the earlier discussion, there was mention of the RAC opinions and how HSE will scrutinise those. I think that there's been prompted a sort of follow-up question here, which is, will there be a formal public consultation on the HSE scientific assessment of RAC opinions? Would either of you be able to comment on that?
Not routinely. The public consultation, there is a public consultation step during the RAC opinion development stage itself, and so we haven't envisaged having a separate routine public consultation as part of the GB process. But as I said, there will be other opportunities to input and to contribute as part of the policy assessment and that side of things, but not a direct public consultation.
Just the last couple of minutes here, so I might have just one or two more questions to go. For products placed on the market prior to the end of the transition period, what period of time is allowed for making changes to the CLP information provided on a product label in terms of EU and GB contact details? So what's the transitional arrangements here for moving into the new system post-exit for updating the information for products that were already on the market before that change?
Yep. So the product was already on the market before the end of the transition period, and it was labelled accordingly at that time. Then that can continue to be supplied through the supply chain. I believe it's until it's the end of the supply chain. However, if changes need to be made to the label, or there's a difference between the classification, the mandatory classification labelling during that time, then updates would need to be made sooner to those labels.
Thank you.
Yes, I just confirmed that this is covered under the withdrawal agreement, which allows it applies not just to products manufactured in the United Kingdom, but also to products in the EU. So if it's been placed on the market before the end of the transition period, it still has this time, as it were, to go through the supply chain and reach its end user.
Brilliant. So I'm just conscious of time here. So I want to say thank you to both Andrew and Francis for this session and for answering so many questions just then. As I mentioned, questions we haven't answered, we will be taking away, and we will be updating our guidance and our e-bulletins and whatnot, where there are gaps that clearly have been identified here. I'd just like to point attendees that I think if you switch back over to the main room, I think there's just going to be a roundup now with the Director of CRD, Richard Daniels, to summarise the day. So just want to say again, thank you to our panelists, and thank you to those attending, and this session has now come to a close, so thanks.